in my opinion, artificial intelligence is not going to help us in competitive strategy. I think that other tools will, such as simulation, and I think that there will be further generations of simulation that might do what we would want AI to do. But I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're going to be there for a while.
Welcome to the Mama Africa Show. We are here with Mark Chussil today. He is the founder of Advanced Competitive Strategies, an expert in business war games, an alumni of Harvard and Yale. Thank you so much for being here today, Mark.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here.
So I used to read your articles and use them in my English lessons years ago. I loved them on Harvard Business Review. So I'm a big fan from a long time ago. I tried your simulations, but I don't think I got through all of them, but they are brilliant. But yeah, I just want to know like a little bit about what you're doing, what you're working on at the moment. You've done so much research. So where's your focus right now when it comes to like business war games, simulations, strategy?
Well, where I am now with those aspects of competitive strategy is in trying to pull these things together, because there's all sorts of directions that people will go, and there's a lot of ways that people say this is what we need to do with strategy, or I've been in this field for a long, long time, and so I know what the right answers are. And we have those kinds of conversations, and part of the issue that I see in competitive strategy is that it's hard. It's very complicated. We have tools such as some spreadsheets. We have forecasts for the future, but those are not strategy. That's closer to financial analysis and to how do I know if I'm if I'm making proper kinds of decisions. Those are hard things to do. And part of the reason for that is because, well, if you think about accounting, for example, it's very clear how accounting works. I mean, accounting has been there for over 500 years. And just a little bit of a tidbit there, the person who invented double entry bookkeeping was a friend of Leonardo da Vinci. So just a little bit there. But we know how the accounting side of things works, but we don't know so well how the competing side works. And it's an important distinction because it's managing, which is all the stuff that goes on inside a company, and that has to happen. We need that stuff. But competing is different. It's not the same. It's not the same thing as when we're trying to manage a business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a lot of sense. And I think that aspect of management is changing a lot. And even now, so someone made a comment on my previous show about, I don't think an MBA differentiates you at all anymore because you have ChatGPT that can like quickly generate a strategy for you. In the current landscape where we have like this huge computational power and energy to help our businesses function better, where does strategy fit in now? Or how has it changed, like how businesses are looking at strategy?
That's a really good question because things have changed over time. When I first got into business, there were very, very few computers around. And I know I'm aging myself by talking about that, but there really wasn't that much computing that you could do. It was hard to get that done, and hard to get it done, especially because there are so many things that we would want to do. Over time, though, as computers have gotten more powerful and as people have thought more about what competitive strategy looks like, we can do things that we simply could not do before. When you increase the power of a computer by orders of magnitude, you can calculate things that you couldn't do a while ago. And that's part of what's so much fun about competitive strategy, because it's possible to put together these simulation models and to see what would happen if I did this, what would happen if my competitors do that. And it's just the field itself is sort of exploding.
I mean, the whole concept of like a business war games that you have different characters, almost like it's like a story in a way. So I come more from like a qualitative social sciences background. So the way that I make sense of any scenario really is try and like create a very simplistic story of like with characters and whatever. But then it actually always helps in like the strategy of what comes out of that. And then I've started using like ChatGPT to kind of supplement that. How are companies now, especially like large firms, how are they dealing with the rapid pace of change?
Well, that's another very good question. What we have in business war games is still something that's relatively slow because it's done by human beings talking with each other. We're saying, well, gee, I wonder, if my competitor is doing that, then what's that going to do for me? And how do I, how do I figure out the steps that come after that? And then there's all the things that are going on with management, and we want to be sure that we're not going to ruin our company, and all those things. So it gets more and more complex, and that's the beauty of the process, because what we really want to be able to do is to explore the different strategies that we can follow, but do it in such a way that nobody gets hurt if things don't work out the way that we wanted. If I can tell a little story, the company that I war gamed, I actually do have permission to talk about some of this story that I'm about to tell. It's from Shell. If you think about gasoline or petrol, it's more or less a commodity, because you can drive to any gas station and not worry that the gas is going to work in your car. So that means that probably what you're looking for is convenience. So that's something that Shell was concerned about, because they wanted to make it less of a commodity. And they came up with an approach that would help them to get customers to think differently. And the way that they could do that was that that Shell would produce many, many gas stations, very small gas stations, but they would not have people. They would be run by somebody who just drives up to a gas pump, and they can put in a credit card and pump their own gas, and off they go. And so what Shell figured was, we can do this, and we can do it first. And so what we have to do is to to build many, many gas stations like that. Because if you want it to be convenient, you have to have a lot of gas stations. That's sort of the whole point. Shell had gone through many tests within the company, and the last thing that they were going to do was a business war game. So that's when I got involved. The people at Shell were very, very smart. I was astounded by the kind of data that they collected about how their customers worked and how their customers thought. So it seemed like, this is probably going to be something that will work pretty well. So they just wanted to test that before they pressed the last button, which would have launched this strategy. Well, in the war game, there were the people who were role-playing Shell. There were other people from Shell who were role-playing their competitors. And it turned out to be very different from what they had expected. Because what Shell originally thought was, we're first at this, we're going to be the best at it, we're going to blanket the market with these stations. But the people who were role playing the competitors, they saw it differently. They didn't say, "Well, Shell, it turns out you did a really good job there. I wish that we had thought of that." No, that's not what they said. What they said was, "We know that this is going to be expensive, but we can't afford not to do that because otherwise we are going to lose our position in the market." And so what Shell thought was going to work really well, turned out, according to their own calculations, it was going to cost them in today's dollars hundreds of millions of dollars by making that mistake. And that was just in one particular geographic area. So what Shell did was they decided not to launch that strategy because it was going to lead to a war, and that would hurt everybody. So that's why, at least in the States, we don't have those kinds of unattended gas stations now.
Wow, that's so interesting that, yeah, and that element of like ethics. I mean, obviously the goal of each company is to be on the forefront of their industry or as innovative as they can be. Is that the idea behind competitive strategy? Or is it about revenue? Is it about innovation? What is the real like objective?
That's a great question because, and people don't ask that question anywhere near often enough. People will think of it in terms of tit for tat. That's something that they might do. But what we really want strategists to do is for them to think of new strategies that they could create and that they could adopt and that they could test. In these kinds of situations where we're going up against a formidable competitor, we need to be fairly careful and we need to think about what are they likely to do? What are some of the things that they may have in mind that we don't know about yet? And so it becomes it's more than just, oh, I think they're going to do this. No, because there's much more that they can do that perhaps they have not done. One of the other things there is that it seems that in business, what the businesses tend to do is to say, well, of course, what we need to do is to maximize our profitability. Well, not necessarily. Because when you have big companies that have multiple lines of business, you may have some businesses that need to generate cash within the company, while others will use some of that cash. So you can't just assume that they're going to be doing something that will be tit for tat-ish. And one of the things that I've learned is that if you start thinking about what are the goals that a business may want to have, that is actually a fairly long list. One of my Harvard Business Review articles has to do with exactly that. It's easy for us to say it's obvious what our competitors are going to do, but then our competitors don't necessarily do that.
It took me a while to get into the thinking of competitors because I was in the arts for a while and then just doing language teaching as well. And so you never think of that, right? And then when I went into the startup course, then you realize like that there's such an energy of competition, and it was like dog eat dog. It was just so horrible. Like for me as an artist, I'm like, this is actually disturbing my artistic energy. But anyways, I very quickly learned like, okay, people are watching each other and what they're doing. I was just thinking about what's the real worries and concerns that people have.
The main things that I'm working on are writing because it's weird because after you've seen 100 business war games, they're not all that different from one to another. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, they're still fun and they're still interesting, and you still learn a lot from doing them. But I've seen enough of them that I don't feel the need to go out and do many more of them. What I'm more interested in is trying to come up with how does competitive strategy work? I know that there's big league people, like especially Michael Porter in the field, or Sidney Schofler, who came up with the PIMS program, Profit Impact of Market Strategy. I worked with Sidney for 14 years, and he's a brilliant, brilliant man. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us because there's so many questions I'd like to ask him. But there's so much going on in strategy because it's inherently complex. That's something that would take us a long time to go through. But if we were to talk about what does strategy look like, what do you want to accomplish? What do you care about? How much risk are you willing to take? How much do you care about profits versus market share? How much do you care about customer satisfaction? How much do you care about the world in which we all live? Should businesses be trying to do good things, or should businesses just say, well, it's your problem to deal with that. I'm just going to do the best that I can in my business. None of these things is right or wrong. The point is that they're complex.
At what point can you say, okay, this is a smart strategy? How do you define a smart strategy?
Very interesting question. And it's the way that people will think about it, and the way that they'll talk about it is that they'll definitely use financial tools and accounting-based tools. They want to do their spreadsheets, and they want to get some kind of idea that their strategy will actually succeed in getting them whatever their desired metric is. But when you do that, what happens is, and this is just something that seems to happen naturally with human beings, we tend to come up with ideas that, oh yeah, that sounds like a pretty good strategy. Let's explore that, and let's get deeper and deeper and deeper into that strategy. There's nothing wrong with that, but it would be really helpful if you think about what are some of the alternatives to what you can do. So Shell, if we go back to that, Shell thought that they had a really good strategy that they had thought through very well. And again, these are really, really smart people who are coming up with these strategies. They didn't know how things would turn out. And when they could see how it might turn out, that's when they have their slap the forehead. Oh my goodness, this is not what I expected is going to happen. But you want to discover that in a place where when you don't get hurt. Now, the thing is with these simulations that I've put together is that in a business war game, it takes hours to run, at least hours, to run a specific strategy through a business war game. With computer-based analysis, trying to figure out what they could be doing, that is something that you can test very quickly with a very large number of strategies. And it's striking to see just how different strategies can be. That's a whole other subject for us to go into. The key thing here is that with simulation, you can learn much, much more about your own business, let alone your competitors.
So what attracted you to this topic in the first place? Like, how did you get the passion for it? And has the passion grown over the years?
The passion continues to grow because the cool thing is that with more and more ideas coming up, I can simulate more of these, more of those options. And so what initially I could simulate maybe a few dozen simulations, then it was in the thousands. Now it's literally in the billions of simulations that can happen. And that gives us yet another way to think about competitive strategy, because we can simulate all of those interactions, billions of them, and we can do, I know you were talking about statistics earlier. This gives us the opportunity to do some statistical analysis of what could happen based on what we do and what our competitors do.
I mean, you have to have the intent there as well, and like the understanding and the comprehension of the data. I mean, a lot of it is storytelling, right? You have to like know what you're looking for and what your intention is with that. That's one thing that I can see from top leaders in big firms. Once they have the intention to do something and then they put that energy behind it, like the impact is so massive. Do you have an example of a strategy that maybe had such a big impact?
I'm thinking of a particular case, so I cannot talk about that one. But this is it's a real business, and it is a large business. They had come up with new technology for how they could produce their product, and what they figured was they could come up with a way to be much more efficient with what they were doing. They would be able to roll that out fairly quickly, and they would be able to have advantages that their competitors would not have. So this sounds like exactly what any business would want to do, because we have this wonderful opportunity. Then we went through the war game with that. It turned out that what their competitors came up with in response was also like Shell. The people at this company ended up saying, well, we can't afford not to match you with your lower price. So even though it's going to hurt us, it's going to be better than if we don't copy you. The cool thing was, again, that the original business, the one that was the client, they were thinking about when we launch our strategy, we will be able to save, and in the dollars of that day would be about $1 billion. I mean, this was a lot of money that they were talking about. But as soon as their competitors came in with a matching strategy, the company was not going to earn another $1 billion. It would be maybe 100 million. Now, it's still $100 million, but it was nowhere near $1 billion. So that's when the key person in the room came up with the idea, with a different idea. It was the boss for that business, and the boss had just recently joined the company, and the boss noticed that everybody in the room was going, "Oh my God, this is not going to turn out the way that we expected." But what the boss said was, "Now I have you where we can actually think about doing something different. So we're going to turn the clock back, and we're going to come up with some new ideas." And before they had done that, they were just, yeah, we know how this is going to work. But then when it didn't work like that, that's when it got people's attention, and they could say, we've got to figure out something different.
How does that relate also to like your personal life? I see you wrote this book, Nice Start. I haven't read it yet, but I really want to. What was that shift where you said, okay, this can apply to all different dimensions of life?
Yeah, I spent some time going through seminars about self-awareness. It's very gentle stuff. I mean, they were not saying be like this. It was not that at all, but it just made me think about a lot of stuff. Here's something that happened. If I can tell a story about what happened in one of these seminars. We were in a small group. There are 5 of us, and we were each supposed to take turns. For 1 minute, you could talk about yourself and what you were proud of. Nothing negative, only positive things. And the other people would have to just sit and listen quietly. So when it came to be my turn, I went on to say, well, I've got a degree from Yale, a degree from Harvard, and I've done these things with businesses, and I've traveled the world and all that. And I thought that was a pretty good minute. And then the next thing that would happen was I had to be quiet, and the other 4 people had to talk to me about what they thought about me, only positive stuff. It's a hard thing for people to listen to because people want to be modest. So in this situation, I wasn't allowed to be modest. So I just had to be quiet. And one person said, oh, this is pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And someone else said, that's pretty cool. And then there was this teenager in the group, and he turned to me and he said, nice start. And that just blew me away. I mean, I had no idea what he meant by that. Was he being nasty? Was he being nice? Was he not knowing what to say at all? It just, where'd that come from? Nice start. And then for once in my life, I did something smart. And I thought, well, what does that teenager mean? What did he mean when he was saying that? And I didn't know the answer. There were a whole bunch of things that it could have meant. And that made me think, what am I doing with my life? How does this change the way that I want to go through the rest of my life and to care about what I care about, both in business and more importantly, in my life. That's where Nice Start came from, and it changed my life.
You are writing another book this year. Can you speak about what you're working on?
Well, sure. I'm working on finishing the next edition of Nice Start, but after that, it will be a business book, and that will we'll see what happens with that, because I'm at the point in my life where I don't want to do the same thing. Well, it's another company, another consulting opportunity. I want to take those things and put them together into something that's more of how strategy works and how to think about strategy and how to come up with better ideas in strategy. Now, I know that there's people in the field who are way ahead of me, like Michael Porter and like Sidney Schofler and others like that. But even if I never get that book published, I still want to write it. I just have to get that book out of my head and get it on paper. I'm sure that it has something to do with not so much, probably something with ego, because there's stuff here that I think I have invented, at least to a little degree. But there's also, it's sort of painful to see businesses struggling in different ways when there are ways that they can make better competitive strategy decisions. Now, I know that people are trying to apply artificial intelligence there. In my opinion, and I may be completely wrong here, and in which case I'll be embarrassed and all that, but hey, I'm willing to take the chance. But in my opinion, artificial intelligence is not going to help us in competitive strategy. I think that other tools will, such as simulation, and I think that there will be further generations of simulation that might do what we would want AI to do. But I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're going to be there for a while. And the bottom line of all that is I ramble on sometimes. All of this stuff is just, here's something that I think is new and worth thinking about. And at least some of those things, I hope, will bear some fruit.
Is there ever a scenario where it's best to do nothing? Or to almost lay low or like play dead?
This is from game theory. And it is possible in some circumstances that if you try to change anything, you're going to make it worse. And so that would be where price wars would come from. And I'm not advocating price wars, and I'm not against price wars. I'm just saying that this is the way that strategies can play out. And that is, well, if I've got a commodity here and I cut my price, then my competitor has no alternative other than to cut their price also. So I shouldn't get that started. And if you want to learn more about that, the place to start is something called the prisoner's dilemma. And that is exactly what would happen if we, in some cases, if we make the mistake of trying to cut our price because our competitors can just respond in exactly the same way.
I work with speakers, right? So managing, and it's such an interesting market, like the speaking market, because it's really bizarre. It's like, why does one speaker get paid the X amount and another this? And like, what strategic decisions could a speaker make to up their profile and like their personal brand, right? But that takes a couple of years, but it's just very interesting. And one thing that is fascinating about that industry and the arts, I think, the film industry, music, is that element of belief, the degree to which a person believes in themselves as an artist, as an actor, as a speaker, as a whatever, really plays into their value and like their competitive advantage. So does that come into the picture ever in terms of strategy, where it's, yes, you know, all the elements, but at the same time, you have a leader making a decision based on their intuition and their desire?
Well, you've just touched on two things there that are very important. One is the idea of leadership, and the other is the idea of how we can come up with a good decision. So those are different. Those are different things. Somebody may say, "This is the direction that I think that the business ought to go," and okay, that's what they can think. There's something else that they might come up with, which is we are being confronted with a competitive threat, and there's something that we have to do about that. So how are we going to make that decision is a separate question from who gets to lead in making this happen. One of my favorite war game experiences, and these, by the way, are in wildly different industries because it's all human. So that keeps happening. But there's a company, large company, that was facing a new competitor entering the market. And the incumbent company was wondering, what should we do? This new company coming in is a genuine threat to us. How should we respond? Should we? And they had narrowed it down to two possible moves that they could make. One was live and let live. And that's not so far off from from the thing that you were talking about with do nothing. Don't mess it up. And that was one of the possibilities. And the other was to was to be very proactive and attacking almost this company. And the company could not decide which of those directions to go. That's why when we did the first simulation in the business war game, it turned out that they were going to lose quite a lot of market share. And at that point, when they said, this is unacceptable. This is our market. We've been doing this market for a long time. It's one thing if you guys are going to get a few points of market share, but do you think you're going to get that much? No way. And so at that point, they were ready to go. I mean, they were ready to say, we're going to attack them as soon as we can. And we said, okay, well, you can do that if you want, but keep in mind that there was another strategy that you had in mind as well. So as long as we're all here and you've already paid us for this, maybe we ought to simulate the other one, the other strategy. And they said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And it turns out that with the second strategy, they would have lost twice as much market share, and they would have lost a huge amount of money. And all of a sudden, they went back to the first strategy, the one about let's not make things worse than they have to be. I've run business war games that are qualitative. There's no computer involved, and those usually are more for brainstorming. But there's also the quantitative ones where we can say, this is what our business looks like now. We think that we can, if we make this change, that will change what our financials look like. But of course, we don't know what's going to happen until we know what our competitors might do. And from the competitors' perspective, they're doing the same thing. They're coming up with numbers for their business, and they're trying to win against the home team. And that does get sort of complicated. The interesting thing about that is that it's really valuable to go through those kinds of exercises, because in the one we just described a few minutes ago, it turns out that there were big differences in the outcomes for their own business, and they didn't know that it would be that much of a difference, and that it would be which business would be the one that would have to pay the price. The bottom line for it is in thinking through what are the variables that we can play with in a particular situation. So if these are the kinds of strategy moves that we might make, and our competitors have similar kinds of moves, then we can simulate all of the combinations of what could happen. If you have just two businesses, it's a relatively small number of uh, of scenarios that can happen. If you have three businesses, it starts to grow fairly fast. If you have four businesses, now you're turning you're talking about a large number of simulations, but it's possible, and this is stuff that's possible now because computers are able to do the arithmetic at that level.
I feel like you also have to you have to zoom out, like get out of a technical mindset. Because sometimes, especially if you have a fast growing startup and you have a very technical team, they can, get very focused on just data. But I think a lot of this is also just interpretation and understanding.
I think that depends on what the measures of success are that you care about. So, and that is a question that startles a lot of people inside companies because they start off by assuming, well, this is going to be a good strategy. Okay, so what do you mean by a good strategy? Think about pricing, for example. Every business has a price. And so pricing is universal. Everybody has to set their price one way or another. And in the top Pricer tournament, what that does is it takes many, many combinations of what could happen in simulated markets. It can also be done in real businesses. That's another story because that gets more complicated. But in the top Pricer tournaments, we can come up with billions of combinations that show us if we use this strategy, how well does that work? If we use this other strategy or some other strategy or some other strategy, and as far as I can tell, that's about the most powerful way that I can think of to come up with those kinds of analyses. Now, those are famous last words. Somebody else may come up with a much better way of doing it than I have. But for now, I'll say this is really good stuff.
So would you say you're more of a researcher?
I go back and forth between the research side and the consulting side, because the research side is the part that says, well, what do I need to have in a simulation in order to have this be a reasonable the way that a business could actually work. I have to put in the right variables in order to do that. And then I've got to be able to do the same thing with the competing variables. So that's the research and development side. Then the other side is to say, well, let's calibrate the simulation for a specific business and see what happens when we run those simulations. And that gives people different perspectives on what how their business can perform.
What question do you wish people would ask you more?
So here's something that always gets me. When companies talk about strategy, they always choose good strategies. Always, absolutely always. And the reason that I know that is because nobody ever says, I've got a good strategy and I've got a bad strategy. I think I'll take the bad strategy. Nobody does that. So when we think about all these strategies that are being chosen, there are bad strategies being chosen as well as good strategies. They appear to be good. Nobody chooses a bad strategy, but they can come up with strategies that are not going to work very well. You've heard a couple of examples of that in talking about these business war games. So what we have, this is getting more into the research side, is how can we tell the difference between a good strategy and a bad strategy? And the reason that's important is because no strategy is always good. So the best that we can do is to come up with a strategy that we can't guarantee is going to be good, but it's going to be the best of all the options that are available to us. I want to share a story with you about a game that I learned, but first I want to tell you a detail that will, at the beginning, it's going to seem like it sort of doesn't connect, but it will. And that's this. I love movies, I love music, and I love my home theater. Um, there was a pair of speakers that I wanted to buy, but they were just ridiculously expensive. And I kept saying, oh, no, someday I'll get those. But then, so I'm going to switch now to a different story before we go back to that. And that is, this is a story about a 20-minute crisis that happened. And it happened 27 years ago. And I know, even though this is 27 years since that's happened, it still affects me emotionally. Those 20 minutes were the most frightening experience of my life, and also among the most wonderful experiences of my life. I got on an airplane to fly from Atlanta to Portland, Oregon. And, the usual stuff, you get in your seat and you take off and all that. 5 minutes after takeoff, there was a loud bang. It was the loudest and most frightening sound that I had ever heard. Everybody on the plane went silent. It was something just happened, because you just know from the sound that the plane made, this is not good. This is not supposed to happen on an airplane. I was on a night flight, and I looked out the window, and on a night flight, you expect that you're going to see black. I saw flickering red because one of the engines had caught fire. It had exploded. When I realized what had happened to the plane, a thought went through my head, and it was a thought that made every previous thought seem like the faintest mental whisper. The thought that I had was a mental roar. It was the cleanest, clearest, loudest, simplest thought that I've ever had. And it was this: I want to live. And obviously, we survived. The plane didn't crash. The pilots knew what they were doing. They were really good pilots, and they simulate. I mean, they know what to do on it. That's how they know what to do. They don't practice crashing airplanes, but that's how they prevent those kinds of events from happening. So we made an emergency landing 20 minutes later. The next day, I bought those speakers. That was something that just got to me. Who cares what those speakers cost? And I still have those speakers 27 years later, and they still sound damn good.
Mm.